Okay, let me say a few things about the Confessions, and then I want to talk a little bit about some general philosophical issues developing out of this. Okay, so as I've mentioned before, this is an autobiographical work more than it is a work of philosophy, as I'm sure you've noticed in reading it. And when we dip into it, we can see a whole bunch of personal journey discussions that Augustine is engaging in, thinking about his own life and what that means. So we see him detailing his time in Carthage. We see him talking about the Manichees, who are these cult-like people who he encounters, who believe that the universe is divided into two forces, good and evil. And they associate the good force with masculinity, the evil force with femininity, and they, for that reason, don't procreate. They're kind of weird. And he falls in with them for a little while, but ultimately manages to extract himself, so he's successful with that. He talks also here about his mother Monica, who has this dream that he's going to return to the Christian faith in which he was educated as a youth. And then a bishop tells her that this will indeed be the case. Okay, so there are a lot of personal issues that are going on in here. A friend of his died, a friend who remains nameless, dies in book 4. And we read about his mourning over his friend. What I want to do first in class, before I look into a couple of the personal issues that arise out of books 3 and 4, is I want to talk about some spin-off issues from book 2. And if you remember, last week we talked about the pear incident. Okay, and we talked about why he did what he did, and he says his explanation is that he has this disease of the soul, his sinful condition, which caused him to do what he did in stealing the pears. And for Augustine, the rescue mission that God has given us, has sent us to rescue us from our sinful condition, the condition into which we are born, is a mission that is not initiated by us, it's initiated by God. Okay, but the whole issue that is at the center of this incident and the whole matter of a rescue mission being needed to rescue us from our sins revolves around a problem that Augustine, as a classical theist, happens to have. Okay, and I have it too. All persons who are classical theists have this problem. Okay, and by classical theist, I mean theists who believe that God's characteristics are the omni characteristics that I put up on the board last week: omnipotent, omniscient, omnibenevolent, and omnipresent. If you believe that God has those characteristics, then you have a certain problem that you have to face. And I'm going to describe that for us today, and I'm going to talk about various solutions to that problem. Okay, so the first problem is what is evil? In other words, what is it? The second problem is, where does evil come from? And then the third problem is the so-called problem of evil, which I'll actually just list it on the board here as the problem of evil. And I'll describe that momentarily. Okay, so these are all issues that classical theists have to deal with. If you are an atheist, if you don't believe in the existence of God, then you don't have to deal with these issues. You have to deal with other problems that atheists have in their worldview. One problem, for instance, is the atheist can't explain why some things seem to be evil or wrong. Okay, because if it's all just natural processes and no divine influence, no right or wrong entering into the picture, then you don't have any kind of an objective morality as an atheist that you can appeal to and say, this helps us explain why some things are wrong in the world. Instead, all that you can do at the end of the day is just say that Some things are natural occurrences. And even though we have the prima facie feeling that something is very evil, some person is evil, the atheist explanation is just that that they are just engaging in particular behavioral processes, but not processes or behaviors that are necessarily evil or wrong. Okay, so the atheist has some serious problems. Let's talk about the problems for a classical theist, though. First problem is explaining what evil is. Okay, and Augustine is acutely aware of this. And if he says that evil is a real thing, then that means that it has real existence. If it has real existence, then that means that God is the author of it. Okay, and this is something I talked a little bit about last week. If God is the author of evil, then you have a problem as a classical theist. God can't be omnibenevolent. Okay, so God must not be the author of evil. So evil, Augustine reasons, must not be a real thing. It must not have real existence. Okay, and this is something that I lectured a little bit about last week. Evil must not have real existence. Evil must be something other than that which has ontological reality or real existence. And Augustine's explanation here is just that evil is a lack or an absence. So in answer to the question, what is evil? Augustine says what evil is a lack or an absence, or a corruption of something. Okay, if I were to take a bowling ball, and if I were to chuck that bowling ball through this chalkboard and through the wall behind it, we would have a massive hole in the chalkboard, would we not? Yes? And would that hole in the chalkboard be real? In a certain sense it would, but in another sense its reality is only something by virtue of the absence of something else. Right? So the hole is something because it is not chalkboardness or not wallness. Okay? So the hole in the wall after I throw the bowling ball through it is not defined as having real existence in and of itself. Rather, its definition is with respect to something else that it is not. Okay, does everybody see how it comes about as not being something else? And that's Augustine's explanation for what evil is. What is evil? Well, evil is an absence or a lack of good. Okay, just as the hole in the wall is an absence or a lack of chalkboardness, so also evil is an absence or a lack of good. Okay, you've all seen, let me vary the example. You've all seen fresh fruit on a kitchen counter. If that fresh fruit is to stay on the kitchen counter for a week or 2 weeks, maybe the apple, right? The apple's going to shrivel up. A shriveled apple core is a corruption of a full, fresh, healthy apple. Okay? And I'm speaking metaphorically here, but it has its being by virtue of comparison with the full, fresh, healthy apple. Okay? The absence of apple creates the shriveled apple core. Okay? We can vary the metaphors, but the point is just that for Augustine, evil is a lack of good, an absence of good. Goodness has being, and evil does not. Evil is simply an absence of the good. Okay, but this leads to another question. Where does evil come from? Where does evil come from? And if God is the author or creator of evil, then God would not be good. Right? God would not be omnibenevolent. So Augustine reasons evil must come from some other source. And the answer is, Augustine thinks that evil arises out of free will. Okay, free will is the source of evil. Let me put that up here on the board. Free beings like us, angels, demons, exercising will, bring about evil. God is not the author of evil, rather God is the creator of creatures who he endowed with free will. And these creatures sometimes choose not to do the good, not to obey God, and that brings the evil about. Okay? It's Augustine's explanation for where evil comes from. But this leads to another problem, the problem of evil, okay, which is a very big problem in classical theism. And you can lay it out in premise, conclusion format. Okay, so God, let's say classical understanding of God, right? God as having, by classical I just mean the four omni characteristics from last time. Right, you guys remember those? Yes? What are they? Omnipotent, omnibenevolent, omnipresent, and omniscient. Okay, God is all-powerful, he's omnipotent, he is omniscient, he's all-knowing, and he's omnibenevolent, all good. So a classical God exists is the first premise, a God that has those characteristics. And the second premise, we might say, there is evil in the world. Therefore, so goes the objection. We're formulating the problem of evil here. Therefore, we have a contradiction. What is the exact nature of the contradiction? Well, it's a contradiction to say that God is all-powerful and all-knowing and all-good, and that there's evil in the world. Right? Because if, or at least so goes the objection. Because if God is all-powerful, meaning he could do away with the evil if he wanted to, he is all-knowing, he knows about the evil, he's aware of its being, right, being around, and he's all good, so presumably he wants to do away with the evil, then why do we have evil? Why is it around? Okay, and here Augustine's explanation is, again, that the reason why there is evil in the world is that God has given certain creatures in the universe free will. The reason why is free will. Okay, he sort of hangs everything in response to this problem on the free will defense. Okay, think about free will for a minute. Free beings are beings who can choose to obey or to disobey. They can choose their path forward. Free beings have meaningful existence. Okay, and if you think about your own life as a human being, a large part of the meaningfulness of your life and of mine, quite frankly, comes from the comes from the exercise of free will. If we were not able to exercise free will, if we were just robots, automatons, a substantial, portion of our humanity would be gutted. We would not be the creatures that we in fact are. So, free will is a very great good on Augustine's view. And God giving us free will is God making us very meaningful creatures who have very substantive worth, substantive value. But at the same time, God can't give us real free will without risking us using that free will against him or against the order of the universe. And Augustine thinks that that is what we have in fact done. So God decided, for some reason, for whatever reason, God decided that it was worth it to create beings like us who had free will, who could potentially choose against him, and have a universe where there are free beings with free will, and evil. Okay, so God decided that this was better than a universe where you have non-free beings, automatons, and no evil, which he presumably could have brought about if he had decided to strip us of our free will. Okay, so for Augustine then, the answer to the problem of evil is very straightforward. It's that God decided that a universe with free beings was better than a universe without free beings. Okay, and like I mentioned, if you think about your own life, or my life, when I think about my life, it quickly becomes evident to me that a substantial portion of my experiences as a human and the meaningfulness of my life comes from my ability to exercise choice and to be able to choose for or against something. So I think that there is abundant empirical evidence when we inspect our own lives that that free will is in fact a great good. Now, there's still another problem, though, and then I'll mention this other problem, and then I'll throw it open for questions. There's still another problem, though. The problem is a little bit removed, right? So it might go something like this. Okay, so the explanation for why God allows evil to continue in the universe is that free will is a great good. Okay, fair enough. But didn't God make the beings who exercised free will? So doesn't this make God ultimately the author of the evil that some of those beings have chosen? So it's a problem that's a little bit removed from saying God is directly the author of the evil, but he's like the author of those beings who brought the evil about. So doesn't this mean that the evil in the universe is ultimately attributable to God? I suppose you could say that in a certain sense, but Augustine's explanation is that you can't have genuine free will, can't have genuine freedom unless the creatures who have that freedom are themselves truly responsible for what they choose. In other words, to ascribe to God causal responsibility for the choices that genuinely free beings make is to undermine the freedom of those free beings, and to say that their freedom is not what matters, or it is the appearance of freedom but not genuine freedom. I have a daughter who's 5. She's starting to make choices independently, all too often, actually. She kissed a boy the other day. Actually, I was we were over at someone's house, and she was in the backyard, and the kids were playing, and it was like on the lips and everything, and I was like, maybe not. Anyway, she's making choices, right? And sometimes her choices are going to be bad choices. Most of the time, so far at least, they've been good choices. Sometimes her choices are going to be bad choices. To say that I am responsible for her bad choices because I helped make her, and she's now making bad choices, is to undermine her freedom as a free being. That would be Augustine's explanation, at least. Whether it's a satisfying explanation, I don't know. You can think about it. But his explanation is that genuine freedom means the causal responsibility has to stop at the free being. The causal buck stops here, right? You can't be a genuinely free being unless you are fully responsible for the choices that you are making, for what it's worth. Okay, questions or comments about that, or clarification questions about the problem of evil? Does everybody see why it's a problem for Augustine, and does everyone see how he solves it? Okay. Okay, good. In the spectrum of free will thinking, it might be useful here to think of it in terms of a continuum of several different views. Okay, so let me put this up on the board over here. On one side, you might have those who think that humans are determined, and that the choices that we make are generally determined. On the other side, you might have those who think that we have what's called libertarian free will, which is complete and total freedom. And then in the middle, you have another view called compatibilism. Okay, a famous determinist in history is a thinker named John Calvin. There are other determinists I could cite, but if you grew up in Presbyterianism, that's a church that arose out of Calvinism. Okay, and basically the view is that much, if not all, of the key ideas and things that we do in life are actually determined. And that includes, for Calvin and Calvinists, that includes our salvific future. Okay, so for a Calvinist, again, this this is not my worldview, it's not Augustine's worldview, but it is a worldview that is defensible, it is out there. For a Calvinist, the reality is that God has decided beforehand who will be saved and who will not be saved. And so all of us, our salvific futures are already determined. Okay, and Calvinists defend this by saying, well, how can God be omniscient if he didn't already know what we're going to choose? And how could he already know what we're going to choose if we have genuine free choice? He must already have determined what we're going to choose. Okay, it's not my worldview. It is a worldview that is defensible. The determinist views of Calvinists have been very influential over the centuries, but it basically is the idea that human beings and our apparent choice is the appearance of choice. That's actually an illusion, and human beings' futures and our lives are determined. Even if you find the determinist view of humans to be indefensible or incomprehensible, and you're turned off by it, still, you could at least agree that a whole lot of our lives do seem to be determined, at least in a soft way. Okay, we speak English here in this classroom. Some of us speak Spanish, right? These languages were determined for us by the fact of our birth, right? It's not something that you can control. That part of your life has actually been chosen for you. Your socioeconomic, the conditions into which you were born, something that was determined for you. You didn't choose that. American citizenship, something determined for you. Okay? Other kinds of things, the values that you value, all kind of were chosen by your station in life, at least for the most part, not entirely. So even if you do find Calvinism and hard determinism to be just too much to take, and you don't think that our lives are determined like that, still, I think that we could maybe see the force of the determinist worldview by acknowledging that at least there's a soft determinism in our lives. And a lot of the things that we do take for granted actually were chosen for us prior to our existence even. It's something at least to think about. Okay, questions about determinism before we move on to these other views? Yeah.
Free will doesn't exist. Everything's predetermined.
Free will is an illusion. The experience of free will that you have in your mind when it feels like you're making choices for a really hard determinist, that's an illusion, and it's an illusion that leads you to believe that you are navigating your own course through life, when in fact, actually, what you're doing is generally chosen. Yeah. So let me camp on that for just a second. It sure feels to me like I'm making choices, and these are real choices. As I go through life, it feels to me like I'm making real choices, okay? But quite frankly, actually, many of the things that I do in life are not real choices in the moment. Okay, maybe we could speak of them as being real choices over a multi-month or multi-year period, but in the moment, they might not really be real choices. What do I mean by that? Well, here's an example. I have, because I've got 3 kids, right, a 4th on the way, I have developed an addiction to goldfish. Okay, if the kid's goldfish sack is left out on the kitchen counter, I will take a handful. Like, that's kind of the way things are these days. And so if you were to see, like as an impartial objective observer just kind of ghosting there in my house in the kitchen, if you were to see the goldfish sack on the counter and see Dr. Neal in the living room get up, go into the kitchen to, I don't know, get a drink of water or something like that, knowing beforehand that the goldfish sack was on the counter, you could probably say with very, very accurate probability that Dr. Neal will take some goldfish from the goldfish sack. This is something that was determined prior to his journey into the kitchen. Okay, so many of our choices, although they feel in the moment to be choices, they're actually results of long months, years, decades even of habituation. Okay, sometimes we encounter really obnoxious drivers on the highway. An obnoxious driver yesterday will probably be an obnoxious driver today. And probably tomorrow will be an obnoxious driver. It takes a long time not to be an obnoxious driver if you've gotten into that habit. In the moment, it's hard to speak of genuine free choice as if someone could suddenly become something different than an obnoxious driver. Okay, because human habits are just so central to who and what we are. All right, so even if you don't agree with John Calvin, like I don't agree with Calvin's determinist view, still we can see how our lives are shaped by a kind of a soft determinism that tends to form us in particular situations. It makes it hard for us to have genuine freedom in particular situations. Okay, on the opposite side, a famous theologian and philosopher who is a libertarian free will advocate is John Wesley. The Armenian view, so Jacobus Arminius is also over here on this side of the spectrum. The Armenian view is that we have genuine freedom and that it is just us. We alone are choosing or are shaping our lives. Okay, and this is the view that probably most people intuitively have. It is not Augustine's view, okay, but it is the view that most people intuitively have as they go through life. It is the view that they themselves are fully in control and can shape their choices and make the choices that they please as they navigate their circumstances. Okay, in the middle, we have the compatibilist view, and this is Augustine's view. It's also the view of another thinker who we will cover shortly after Augustine, Aquinas, Thomas Aquinas, the great medieval philosopher. The compatibilist view is just this. Humans have free will, and God determines their lives. And these two things, human free will and God's determining power, are compatible with each other. Okay? So human free will, God's determining power, these are compatible with each other and can simultaneously happen. They can simultaneously be the case. Okay, now if you're like me, you immediately think when you encounter this view, you're like, dude, how can God determine us and we have free will at the same time? How is that possible? Okay, and you might think of this in terms of metaphors. Okay, so let me give you a metaphor as an example. When I became a teenager, I got my own room at home, okay? And I did what all teenagers do when, they sometimes get their own rooms. I immediately trashed it, okay? My room was a mess. This is a total mess. I would have to like hop from space to space to get to the bed, right? Because there's so much junk on the floor. Okay, so my room's a mess. And let's say it's a Saturday morning, and we've got company coming over that night. My room is visible from the front door. My mom says, look, I don't want the company seeing your trashy room. You better have your room cleaned up by the time company comes over at 6. And so let's say I goof off and hang out and do nothing until maybe about 2 p.m. when I decide I'll finally get to work. I clean up my room for 2.5 hours and stop at 4:30. My room is clean at 4:30. At 10 a.m., my room was not cleaned. At 4:30 p.m., before the company comes at 6, my room is clean. So which of the two agents in the story brought about my clean room? Was it me? Or was it my mother? Who did it? Who is responsible for my clean room? It's both, right? Both agents simultaneously determined the clean room. Because without my mother telling me to clean my room would not have been clean at 4:30 in the afternoon on Saturday. However, without me doing the cleaning, my room would also not be clean at 4:30 on Saturday. So we both actually brought about the same act. One was a proximate cause of that, and one was a remote cause of it. Now, this is just a metaphor. So like all metaphors, it's got its limitations. Okay, but maybe something like that is what is going on, is what compatibilists would say. Maybe God determines and we determine simultaneously. So we have free will and God determines on our behalf. This is an explanation of human free will that enables compatibilists to reconcile the sovereignty of God over the universe and over human affairs with the existence of human free will. Okay, namely, God and we simultaneously determine choices. Yes?
How is it free will, though, if it's already determined? That's what I'm
Yeah, man, that's the hard thing. So I'm a compatibilist, I'd say, half the week. Half the week I'm a libertarian. How can it be free if it's also determined at the same time? Well, again, think of it in terms of the metaphor, right? So I chose to clean my room, and my mother chose that my room would be clean as well. Now, I could disobey, so that's the limitation of the metaphor, right? I could disobey and it might not be clean, right? And presumably we couldn't do that with God, but somehow, the compatibilists say at least, somehow God, in his sovereign control, shapes our lives and our futures, and we actually freely choose at the same time. We could use other metaphors, a soldier obeying the orders of a general on the battlefield or something like that. Remote cause, proximate cause, that kind of a thing. The point is just that for the compatibilists, God's determining power and our free will are compatible with each other and can simultaneously bring about our course of affairs. Let me throw it open and ask if there are questions or comments about those things. We don't know the answer to these questions. These are speculative kinds of questions that are fun to think about. And the point is the journey along the way and the interest that these questions generate. So it's important to think about them for that reason. Okay, I want to open up the text now. And if you've got your text, go ahead and pull it out, and we'll take a look at it. We're going to totally shift gears now. Okay, what we've been doing is topics in philosophy of religion so far. This is a text that has a lot of different kinds of topics in it. And this is a course more generally where we're covering, a quick survey of a bunch of different kinds of fields in philosophy, a bunch of different fields, loosely related to each other. Okay, so I want us to do a topic in philosophy of aesthetics. Aesthetics is art. Again, this is a very different kind of a topic, but I'm going to extract it from the text. We'll talk about it, and we'll talk about some of the issues in philosophy of aesthetics. Okay, and if you look in chapter 2 of book 3, we find Augustine recounting his time going to the theater. Okay, he says here, I'm reading my translation, "The theater enraptured me, for its shows were filled with pictures of my own miseries and with tinder for my fires. Why is it that a man likes to grieve over doleful and tragic events which he would not want to happen to himself? The spectator likes to experience grief at such scenes, and this very sorrow is a pleasure to him. What is this but a pitiable folly? For the more a man is moved by these things, the less free is he from such passions." Okay, and he goes on to actually extensively discuss his time at the theater. Okay, so I commend the rest of that passage to you. One of the philosophers we've covered in this class, Plato, in one of his very famous works, The Republic, makes a point of saying in the ideal city, this republic that he's envisioning in this famous work of his, in the ideal city, we're going to allow no art except state-sanctioned art. That means no theater, no music, no public pictures except theater, music, and pictures that promote the welfare of the state. The reason why is because Plato was deeply, deeply disturbed and worried about art. What both Plato and Augustine in this passage talk about is that art has the ability to speak to us, to drill down deep into our souls, as it were, in a way that mere argumentation does not. Okay, and art has the ability to shape our character states in ways that mere argumentation does not. Okay, so if you've ever tried to convince someone of the correctness of your opinion, you know that mere argument almost never works. Okay, if you try to argue somebody into seeing it your way, it almost never works. But if you tell a story, if you show a movie, if you use art, it has a way of speaking to the human soul much deeper than mere argumentation. Now, this concerns Augustine, and it concerned Plato a lot too. Plato was worried about people seeing art and theater and music, hearing music that might undermine their allegiance to the republic, the city-state. So he was worried about rebels, rebellious art, right? So he wanted to ban all art except that which was state-sanctioned. Augustine is worried about other kinds of things creeping in through art. So Augustine is concerned about art because he thinks that the theater is a dangerous place. When he goes to the theater, he sees things that he would never tolerate in real life. Okay, for instance, and he doesn't actually say this, but I'm assuming that this is the sort of thing he's referring to in this passage. You can go to the theater, right, and see. We'll just use movies. That's the theater of our time, right? Okay, we watch movies. We see murders take place in the movies. We would never allow these to take place in real life. We would be horrified by them, shocked by them. We would put a stop to them. And yet we see hundreds, thousands. I read a study one time about the number of murders that I think it was 9-year-olds had seen on American TVs or, in American movies. And I can't remember the exact number, but it was in the thousands, the number of murders that 9-year-olds had seen. Okay, and this is really concerning to Augustine. This is really concerning to him because he thinks that our character states get shaped by the art that we see in a way that goes much deeper than mere argumentation. Okay, now I thought I would just raise that because this is an issue that crops up from time to time in philosophy of aesthetics. The question, I guess, at the heart of this issue is, does art shape us more deeply than argumentation? And I think most people would say yes in response to that. But the follow-up question immediately then becomes, when art depicts morally dangerous things or morally reckless behavior, is that something that we should be concerned about or not? Okay, Augustine is very concerned about it. Most Americans are not. I'm not sure if I am or not. I'm kind of on the fence on this particular issue. But is it something that we should be concerned about in shaping our character states? Okay, maybe I could put it this way. This is something you often hear about with regard to video games, right? Video games are a form of art. Do violent video games create violent people? For the most part, I'd say the evidence is clearly not. Like, I think that the great majority, the vast majority of human beings who play video games where they blow people's heads off in the video games would never consider blowing people's heads off in real life, right? But for some, it does seem to actually shape them. Okay, this El Paso shooter dude a couple of years ago who shot up the Walmart appeared to be wanting to live out his Call of Duty fantasy in real life. Okay, and there's some others who do warts, twisted things like that. I don't know. I thought I would throw it out there and see what you guys' opinions are on that. Maybe you could weigh in on the question of whether violent video games lead to violent people, or the question of whether people are shaped by art more deeply than argumentation, and whether that's sometimes a dangerous thing or whether it's something to be embraced, whether we should see it as potentially unmanageable, like Augustine does, dangerous because it's unmanageable. You don't know where the art is speaking to your soul, right? Or whether we should see it as something that is a beautiful part about art, something that we should embrace and idealize. Yeah, let me just throw that open and see if people have any opinions to weigh in on that. Go for it.
I believe it has to do with our free will and our conscious mind. If we were to witness a murder, art would, or let's say in a movie, art would become an issue if it's able to drive us to commit those same murders.
Mm-hmm.
But that also applies with our conscience. If we actually choose to take part in that and consciously choose to view this art and media as I should do this as well, as opposed to something that is just there for entertainment.
Mm-hmm. Good. Okay. Excellent. Good. Others? What do you guys think? Yeah.
It also has to do with how, I guess, developed your mind is, because, for example, children
Great,
love
yeah.
to emulate adults, love to emulate many things they see.
Yeah, that's
If you
true.
play a rap song, they might pick up some bad words.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess there's many factors that go into it. I'd like to say that art's a profound thing that we should embrace,
Mm-hmm.
but I can see how art can also be a negative thing too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember I was at a party one time when I was a graduate student, and the department secretary was there, and I was talking with her young son. He was 6 years old, and he was listening to something on his headphones, right? And so I was like, hey, dude, can I listen to what you're listening to? Okay, so pop it in, right? It's like, right? Okay. So it's Eminem, right? Rapping with like constant F-bombs. And I was like, whoa, dude! The 6-year-old's listening to this. Anyway, yeah, I think with some people, especially kids, this is a really big issue because kids don't have a kind of the ability to defend themselves against the art like adults do.
They're much more impressionable.
They are, yeah, absolutely. They absolutely are. My kids watch the superhero show PJ Masks, and they're constantly running around pretending they're superheroes. Like, this is just part of their daily existence, is like they are superheroes. And I always am the villain for whatever reason. I don't know how that comes about, but they'll be like, you're the bad guy, and we're going to beat you. Okay. So I definitely think that's the correct point, that kids have fewer defenses against art's ability to speak deeply to the soul. Does that mean adults have complete defense against it? I think surely not, right? So adults are impressionable too, just not as impressionable. Adults are definitely shaped by the art that they encounter. I was reading one video game study of a way that happens in a positive manner, right? So apparently video gamers have much faster reflexes than other people. And this is a good thing when they're driving on the highway, because they actually apparently can react to threats, like in their video games. They can react to threats much more quickly than other non-gamer people in the general population. The study didn't have a positive conclusion, though, because it said, unfortunately, most of the gaming population is also distracted as drivers, so they're like distracted drivers. So they can react much more quickly to the threats, but they actually don't see the threats coming until like the very end, and then they react real quickly to them successfully. So it's not clear whether the overall result is fewer accidents. But so yeah, that's a positive way in which people are shaped by art. It's not doesn't just have to be negative, like Augustine talking about seeing violence or something like that, and it shaping him in his real life. It's an issue to think about. We're going to return to the philosophy of aesthetics topic, okay, and in particular, we're going to return especially to the objective values topic in philosophy of aesthetics. But for today, I just wanted to introduce the question of what art is and whether art is capable of speaking to us in ways that go beyond argumentation. And Augustine certainly thinks so. Plato thought so, and I tend to agree with them that art is actually a much more powerful medium that people encounter than the kinds of arguments that we're talking about in our class here. You can be convinced of something theoretically, but art can actually convince you emotionally in a way that completely transcends the head knowledge of a philosophical argument. And it goes far beyond, you truly believe it when you encounter it in art, as opposed to merely being convinced by a premise conclusion argument, which is not nearly as thorough, I think, in its ability to shape us. But anyway, that's a topic for another day. Okay, that's all I got for today. Are there any closing questions or comments? Yeah, go for it.
Which books would we have to be reading to be on track for next week?
Sure. So always read what's on the syllabus for the day of the class, okay? So if you read each day this week for our classes, what's on the syllabus for that day, you'll be fine. In class, we're actually still behind, unfortunately, but I'm trying to catch up, and I hope to be fully caught up by spring break or shortly thereafter. Yep, good. We may be bumping back our second exam just by a week or so. I'm not sure yet, but it's because of the lost week and because I'm trying to catch up. Okay?